behalf of the Chairman, Dr. Manoj Shah, and the Board of Directors, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our Chief Guest, Dr. Nicholas Murugaru, for giving us his valuable time to be with us this morning and to be our Chief Guest at this very important symposium. I wish to congratulate Dr. S.T. Patel and his entire team for their untiring efforts in putting up this 4th annual symposium to enhance new knowledge and new developments for the medical fraternity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to inform you that P Shah Hospital has always been in the forefront in providing quality, affordable healthcare services to the community for over last 80 years. The high level of service is a hallmark for the past 8 decades and has remained consistent, and will touch lives and bring hope to many in our great country of Kenya and in the region. In a bid to positively impact on the community health care, P Shah Hospital hosts an annual medical symposium for the infectious diseases. As the world's burden on non-communicable diseases increases, developing countries with majority of its population in mid and low income brackets still struggles with the burden of infectious diseases.
In Kenya, we have 2 vets employed by Ministry of Health to help us in those areas of zoonotic diseases because we have a very strong unit of disease surveillance and response. We know that an unprecedented increase of movement of people and commodities worldwide, the increasing interaction of human beings with the environment, deforestation, climate change and variability, urbanization, the intensification of animal production in response to growing global demands for proteins of animal origin such as milk, eggs, meat, economic development, and international trade in exotic pets are just some of the factors that have provided a great opportunity for transmission of pathogens between animal species and human beings. This has changed the ecobiology, infectious agents, including vector-borne disease spread, and resulted in pathogens crossing the species barrier between wildlife, domestic animals, and human beings, leading to increased threats to protected species and biodiversity, as well as to the health of domestic animals and human beings. Lastly, I would like to thank the board and the management of P Shah Hospital for their continued support in providing care, including emergencies. I really want to appreciate your support in Westgate response. And we were humbled by your support and the care you provided. You remember what happened in Garissa? P Shah and Aga Khan and other hospitals did support in responding to those emergencies. And that's the partnership we are looking towards. I also want to congratulate the technical teams that have been working very closely with the management of the hospital. I know the other speakers who have come here to participate and make this meeting a success.
The treatment of sepsis has been a concern, and international guidelines were first put out in 2004 and subsequently reviewed in 2008. At the KNH, we noticed that the burden of MDRs, particularly in the critical care, was quite large. And the organisms that have been seen in many other units, such as ESBLs, hyperproducing AMC, in a country where people use third-generation cephalosporins very rationally, it's very easy to have a hyper-producing AMC and ESBLs.
Instead of focusing on the original patients described in these studies, which is the sepsis with generally severe hemodynamic alterations, it extends to anybody with fairly mild disease. And I would challenge you to actually read an article. It was from Lancet Infectious Diseases 2012. I don't have the reference up here, but can get it at break time. It was a University of Virginia surgical intensive care unit study where for 1 year they used a more aggressive approach, which meant that with suspected infection, now this is excluding major hemodynamic problems, but where they took patients with suspected infection and they would treat them for 3 days. If their workup was negative, they would stop That was the conservative approach, or the aggressive approach. The conservative approach, which they did the following year, and they really did it to find out if it could be done safely, was that they would not start antibiotics in those patients until they had proven infection. And guess what? The mortality rate in the second group was actually half that of the first group. I think it substantially surprised even the investigators.
My presentation today is going to be on the issues that have been touched on already. I think Dr. Omonge in the morning mentioned it for a bit, and I think Dr. Lois has also touched on a bit of the vancomycin use. I'm going to go through a couple of issues that we see normally with critically ill patients with the use of antibiotics. If you've got less protein in your body, you naturally have a higher volume of distribution. So basically, if you're giving a hydrophilic drug, you have a higher concentration initially. But because the drug is not bound, remember that bound drug is what is excreted later back into the circulation. So because you have a lower amount of albumin, that drug is excreted faster. So initially you may get a higher level or concentration, but in the long term the drug is actually excreted out. So you've got a higher level, but you would probably need a more frequent dosing for a hydrophilic drug.
Some of the people that have been very forward about using the Candida score have been probably the South Africans. And in the Candida score, for those who may not be familiar with it, they look at a patient who's hemodynamically unstable, who's been on broad spectrum antibiotics, in whom you get Candida colonization from various sites. So that could be axilla, groin, in the urine, from your tracheal aspirate. And in those settings, they also include the beta-D glucan as part of the score, which was mentioned briefly earlier. And they thought that having a high score in that setting was usually predictive of having Fungemia candidemia. So in a patient who is hemodynamically unstable with a high Candida score, there is some logic to starting empirically even as you wait for the culture.
There's been a lot of talk about extended spectrum beta-lactamases, pretty much organisms coming up with ways of hydrolyzing or inactivating antibiotics, and I'll talk about the extended spectrum beta-lactamases, talking about third generation cephalosporins and monobactams.
We have to be careful not to be complacent. In the 90s, Zanzibar, like Sri Lanka, don't forget to make a country malaria-free is much easier if you're dealing with an island, because you have an automatic block and the border post and all that. So we saw that Sri Lanka now is practically malaria-free. In the 90s, in Zanzibar, a much smaller island, there was the worst possible malaria that I've seen. In 2013, after we introduced the ACT combination, without knowing, we probably blocked the transmission because we made the gametocytes sterile. In 2011, there was no more malaria in Zanzibar. These had incredible implication from the economic touristic point of view. Now, there is again malaria in Zanzibar. Maybe it's because Professor Menji has come to Nairobi and has left the Tanzanian control and all that, but I mean, it's very easy to be complacent and to have setback.
Now, what is an adjuvant? You see, when you have an antigen, you can only have a certain antigen that is going to be a response to a certain amount of antibodies, right? So, how can you have the same antigen produce more antibodies? What you add is an adjuvant. That adjuvant acts like a booster. It boosts the response of the antigen. All right? That's why most vaccines have aluminum hydroxide. Some have a mercury product, some have gelatin, but mercury and gelatin are being refused for most vaccines, so most of them have aluminum hydroxide. That's the role of the antigen.